drivers in preparation for the FY26 budget cycle. Then we'll enter executive session to deal with some matters related to collective bargaining. And then we will come back very briefly into open session to adjourn. So just so everybody knows. And with that, I will turn it over to Marie Solovaro to kind of kick off the discussion.
Thank you for coming out to meet tonight in front of a large audience. Wanted to follow up on a presentation that I'd given as an inkling at the beginning of October, if you remember, sort of concerns about the town's fiscal 26 budget. To recap, we're facing a trickier time due to a confluence of factors, the use of one-time funds that are no longer available, our declining free cash, which as opposed to prior years, our free cash is in the 700K range, 760K range, and that our expense growth historically has been outstripping what we can raise through our guaranteed revenue base, that's being the Prop 2.5 local tax revenue plus the new growth. That is the, in effect, solid as Sears revenue base that one can count on. Other things will improve the town's revenue, but those are variable. It's local receipts, motor vehicle excise, do people buy more cars? Do they license more dogs, have more building permits been pulled? But in terms of sort of solidity for recurring expenses, one typically looks at your tax base. For the revenue drivers outside of that, we have state aid that has been flat. It's in the 300, and I am precise, but I'm going for generally correct versus precisely wrong, but it's been relatively flat. It may increment 10,000, it may not, but I'm not expecting great groundswell for fiscal 26, as well as what has been sort of tiding the town through are permit revenues, sort of one-time funds with the resultant new growth. I'll go into that a little bit more. During the current fiscal year, as we're in fiscal 25, we have had some notable building permit revenue coming in. The good news is, yay, that has outstripped our estimates. The so-so news is other revenues that we were expecting, though, within fiscal 25, such as the cannabis 3%, are definitely going to be falling short. So we're in an okay position in fiscal 25. I had been concerned. Any monies that exceeded our estimates, net, will end up being moved into our free cash. And in fact, that will be certified next fall, available for use fiscal 27. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, yay, good news, and it is good news, but it's not good news for the current budget season. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. For the budget drivers, I want to just caveat my remarks, which is that I'm sort of at a 20,000 or maybe 10,000 foot level at this point. I also have received just a few budgets from municipal departments because they're not due until the 9th of December. And I am a deep believer that the department heads know best how to winnow their budget to what is most vital. I think I bring a perspective and the ability to act on things, but I always am a supporter of go to the source. What would you cut? What would you reduce? Also wanted to say, through reviewing and past budget books, as well as conversations with the advisory chair, the budgets have, I think your point, been combed through. They have been scrutinized. They have been winnowed. So there isn't anything that quite jumps out as, well, we can go without this and it won't be evident to the residents. The numbers that I'm working from, again, as a caveat, are looking back at the actuals for fiscals 21, 22, and 23, are budgeted for fiscal 24, and are budgeted for fiscal 25. I have also gotten some insight from the town accountant, the amazing Ninotchka, regarding the transfers and closeout for fiscal '24, but that hasn't been widely publicized, and that is in this packet of page 1 of 8, page 2 of 8, where you can see cross transfers. Likewise, the numbers that one sees, say, in a warrant booklet only will tell you part of a story. So if you're looking at what was budgeted for fiscal '25 for a specific department, that and what versus what was budgeted for fiscal '24, you're only seeing that snapshot in time. We've had successive chargebacks or reappropriation of money. So we'd use the example, I think in an earlier conversation, of the police department due to some vacancies. If I look at a number of, 1.3 for police, how much of that 1.3 has been transferred to other departments? Sort of like, you get an inkling of a story, but not the entire story. And I can see Brian looking ahead. Part of the packet in front of you, which was sent, what I'm talking about in terms of telling a story are the pages such as these, so the pages 1 through 8, which are a snapshot in-depth view of fiscal '24. Part of my interest in looking at it was I can see what had been budgeted. In the far right column, I can see how the end of the year closed out. Those columns in the middle, though, are showing transfers into those lines. And what I'm trying to, in fact, suss out is, are those transfers for an ongoing expense? You know what I mean? So we're using the line of purchase of services for the select board, near and dear. Budgeted 10,000, 9K was transferred in, and it closed out with $120. What is the real go-forward number, or was that an anomaly? So there's more budgeting and more winnowing, but at back to my 10,000 foot level, and back again to the things that we can count on. Page 1 just looks at our per fiscal year tax levy, what we generate from 2.5, what the assessors ascertained would be our new growth. What I've done is summarize then our year-to-year new tax levy generated. Remember that other component in our budget is local receipts, fees, fines, permits, etc. And so what is the change in our local receipts from the prior year? Because in the background, not surprisingly, budgets seemingly go up every year. They rarely go down. And so looking at, if I look at we can count on this money, I keep thinking of like you've got a friend in me, for budgeted for 2024, our new monies change from the prior year is about $850,000. As mentioned earlier in October, our existing shortfall is about $1 million. That is the one-time funds that were rolled in either from ARPA or from free cash that are likely not available to us. I understand that in the past, it has been common to roll one-time funds in the hopes of reoccurrence of one-time funds. It works up until the point, in my experience, until it doesn't. The expenses that the town has are ongoing and accruing. There aren't there isn't like a one-time hire, and then after 1 year that position drops off.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? And mostly this is in case anybody is watching this back at a future point, but I just want to underscore something that you just said or summarized, which is that based on our roughly 5-year look back at revenues and then what we're expecting or anticipating for fiscal '26, we have we have a pretty decent picture of what we think the anticipated revenues for FY '26 could be, although there's some assumptions and stuff baked into that. And then we also have, although our department budgets aren't due until later in this month, we still have a best guess at what our total expenses for FY '26 could be if we sort of kept the status quo, and there's a delta of 1 million between those two.
About that.
Yeah.
And the one pager that I handed out has, this should look familiar that I'd shown, but the second page are 2 slides from a presentation that the advisory chair will be giving tomorrow night to the advisory committee. So they were looking at our historic operating expenditures and what the year-to-year increase was, and coming up with just various slices of a budget preview. What would the shortfall be at 4% year to year, a 5%, 6%? Certain, as I briefed the select board, certain expenses, recurring expenses, you're starting to fill in. Our Worcester Regional Retirement Assessment has increased 100,000 for fiscal '26. Our Regional Dispatch Assessment, so these are non-negotiable and you can't cut them back, has increased 16K. And my expectation would be a health insurance increase, but we'll find out more in January.
On page 2 of the one page,
Yeah.
okay, we have FY '26 projected revenue 30,900,000 plus free cash. Is that adding, taking 410,000
This
free
is the
cash?
advisory's proposal, what they'll be discussing tomorrow night.
And what's minus stabilization?
This would be the second year of 3 years of
Okay.
payment.
Okay. Okay. And are all of these numbers assuming based on last year's budget? Are we baking in are we baking in anything relative to what the schools are projecting?
We are not yet, and the one clarification that I also want to raise on the schools, sort of flipping, we can flip to page 3 of 5 on this, is there's school operating assessment. Page 2 is fun, but it's not the most fun. But there's the school operating assessment for 2 schools. And then there are other things rolled into that quote-unquote assessment. What I've done is split out, and this is broken out in the warrant booklet for Neshoba, but at Minuteman, it's rolled together. For both schools, the town has approved debt exclusions. Right? So I'm only looking at the operating assessment. The taxpayer has already authorized that debt exclusion, and that's basically counted as revenue, even though people have not seen the full impact of the high school debt.
I understand it, but I'm talking about the increase to the assessment. Is that baked into?
Into the advisory's numbers, I'm not entirely sure.
I think it looks like there's just an assumption
Just,
of,
yeah,
of
roll it.
applied
Roll
across
it.
the board of 5, 4, and 6%.
Yeah. Yeah, except if I look at the total schools, that is inclusive in the advisory document, it's inclusive of the debt, just rolling forward the full debt.
But that's historical. That's
Yeah.
historical. But I'm talking about these numbers.
Yeah, that I can ask Bob. So I'm just giving you 2 slices. One
Yeah.
is, this is the Marie slice, and then this is the advisory slice. We're basically on the same street, probably not the same house number, but we're close.
Well, I mean, at a very high level, if we're already about $1 million short,
Mhm.
okay? That doesn't factor in, forget about all the transfers and the ins and outs and everything
Yeah,
else
yeah,
that
yeah.
could affect the number. But if we just go with, we're $1 million short, we still haven't factored in our increase in
the
assessment, which
operating
last year was
assessment.
$1.4 million, if I recall correctly.
Well, let me ask Marie, this million here,
Mhm.
is that your million also?
The 107?
Yeah.
Close, yeah, pretty much.
Because I think, if I'm understanding Stan's question, this, it seems pretty clear to me, is basically just advisory, looked at operating expense for the past few years, including the school, looked at what the average increase was, and then just came up with a few different scenarios. So these increases are, like, baked in here is a 6% increase of the school's operating assessments. So here, we know that if all of our expenses increase by 5%, including the schools, we're at $1 million shortfall. And I guess my question for you is, did you come to $1 million shortfall, not like holding the school
Yeah.
constant?
Mhm.
Well, that number can't be right. If we're $1 million short, if nothing else changed. If nothing else changed, we're $1 million short. If everyone came with exactly the same number and the schools didn't increase by a dime, we're $1 million short. We have $1 million that we can't cover, that we covered last year. So that means that the assessment is on top of this, or somewhere.
Yeah, but is that, so when you came up with your million, what was your assumption for
My
this?
assumption was the straightforward 900K of free cash, 100K of ARPA, all rolled into operating.
Right.
No, I'm saying, when you came up with your million shortfall,
Mhm.
what was your assumption about the school operating assessment?
My assumption was it would be 598K.
Increase?
Yeah, at a 3.31%, so it's, yeah.
All right, so
Yeah.
you're,
Historically, it's 598, yeah, this
Got
was
it.
my old, yeah.
I see.
well, it's actually more than that. It's-
Well, but almost 650,000 last year of the school increase was debt that the taxpayers lost. They just hit us as, here's your assessment. It's your operating assessment, your capital assessment.
All right, so your $1 million has $598,000 baked into it.
Yeah,
Yes.
looks like it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm taking, because I was just looking exclusively at their operating, not their debt, not the full year on year, because we've already authorized the debt. Which, sort of in the back of one's mind though, if you remember an earlier update, where the school was looking at going for the second funding tranche of $80 million, it makes, it's a tough budget season, given that they will need that funding within fiscal '25, first payment, fiscal '26. That will already be reflected in the bills that taxpayers will be receiving next January, that increase. And it makes any asks for any override really painful and tricky.
Asking for an override anytime is painful and
It's
tricky.
it's painful and tricky, but it adds another layer of complexity to it, another layer of complexity and pain. I think part of what has been, having been there myself as a taxpayer, is one authorizes debt, and then you don't see it for a while, and so life isn't quite so bad, and then you see it, like a year plus later. The largest expense debt is the Neshoba operating assessment, which is their largest year-over-year variable. Keep in mind, using the example of Worcester Regional, which is hitting us with 100,000 increase in fiscal '26, it's hitting Neshoba Regional with a significantly larger increase. Our health insurance is going up some amount, presumably their health insurance is going up some amount. So it doesn't make it easier, but I think that we can definitely question the schools when their budget comes out later in the spring, but also many of the factors and headwinds that we're encountering in terms of assessments, all municipalities and regional systems are encountering. So, back to the excitement of page 2. Page 2, I was just basically trying to trend out. If you look at our local receipts for building, electrical, plumbing, and gas, it's this cyclical up and down trend. And in effect, it's like an illustrative example that construction is cyclical in Massachusetts. To that end, that has tided us over through some lean periods, but it's likewise very variable. And to my earlier comment, we're not adding staff on a variable fashion. We're hiring person X, not person X this year, but then that position won't exist and then it'll be back. So it's hard to put your weight down to trust in building permits and sort of local receipts for an ongoing budget.
When are the building permits, et cetera, going to be coming in relative to 580, or have they?
580, the building permit for the 5 structures is in already, and then in the spring, likely January, the permit for the high school will be in.
And when do the payments start coming in for both those projects?
For the permit fees, the permit fee for 580 is in and received and permit's been issued.
Okay.
Yeah. It was back to the, fiscal 27 looks good. But we're just trying to get through to fiscal 26.
Yeah.
If I slice, the large spenders, and this doesn't quite work in black and white, everything looks the same. But splitting out public safety, which is encompassing police and fire, employee benefits, our health insurance, our regional assessments, education, and then general government. General government, I believe, is the very smallest slice on this.
Always is?
Always is. The one thing that I've done then and tried to figure out is how are we trending in terms of our municipal salaries and wages. As I mentioned back in October, it's been fairly variable. Our increase from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25 is 4.56. If you remember conversations about different bargaining agreements that individuals move with a step, and that step has a sort of built-in base increase. For the town non-union, that step is 3%. For the police department in their existing contract, that step is 5%. So when people say, only a 1% COLA, that can either translate into a 4% increase or a 6% increase. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like whenever we talk about wage and salary stuff, I always have some basic questions I want to make sure I got straight. So I understand that every employee who is covered by a collective bargaining agreement, their step increases are contained within that CBA.
Right.
And like you said, it could be
5%.
Do we happen to know what the highest step percentage is?
5.
5, okay. do we know what the lowest step percentage is?
I would say 4,
Okay, so, all right, so that's for people that are part of a union.
correct.
And then for, and not thinking about department heads that may have a
Let me
contract.
just
Go ahead.
clarify, actually for the fire and EMTs who are not full-time, they have no step.
Okay.
Okay.
And then for folks that are not part of a union, like a lot of town hall staff.
Right, that's 3%.
But, so let's just, we could use library as an example, right? So like, library folks are on the steps, and those steps are uniformly 3%,
Correct,
and everybody gets a step every year.
correct.
And so then anything that we give as a COLA is additive to whatever,
Is overlaid on that. yeah.
right?
So-
And then if somebody is at the top of their grade,
Mhm.
no more steps available to them.
Correct. The-
So then they're just getting the COLA.
Correct.
Correct, and the presumption based on, say, a 10-step system would be, at that point, they would be eligible for longevity. Yeah, but, so it wouldn't just be a COLA, but, yeah.
Great, thanks.
So municipal salaries and wages, though, have been trending upward. In my review of Bolton's municipal wages, though, across our comparable communities, which Jenny had given me this list, and I've distributed to department heads. It's encompassing the quote-unquote usual suspects of Berlin, Boxborough, Lancaster, Stowe, Harvard, Carlisle, and I've probably forgotten one. Boylston, yeah. We're in the mix. We're not the highest paid, we're not the lowest paid, we're kind of at the 60th percentile, which makes us competitive because I think our benefit package is likewise competitive. All that said, it's an ongoing additive expense. So I looked at things because I've heard, and as I just heard this evening, that operational override, bad, very bad. I'm not sure, sort of checking under the couch cushions, what options we have. One of the larger things is a transfer station, which pains me deeply. I'm a huge fan of transfer stations. Someone said, I can't believe you're proposing this, but we're not required to provide a transfer station. Our expenses, the gap between our expenses and the revenues received is about 200,000. We have some options to, clean up and try to recapture those costs, but at present, it is sort of creating a gaping hole in the budget.
I have a question on that. On the expense side for the transfer station, is that factoring in the wages for the DPW workers as well?
That's just the wages. I didn't back in their benefits.
Okay,
Yeah.
but then the other part of it would be the expenses of what it costs us to dispose and move the trash and that sort of stuff.
Right, I was just
okay.
taking, I was initially just grabbing the warrant booklet, which is sort of the all-in, and looking at that expense number, and then pulling up our local receipts for revenue generated. We generate on average about $99,000 a year for bag revenue. Zanily enough, I was looking at the 1991 town report where we were generating 77,000. So it's like, ouch.
What year was that?
91. So it's only the slightest uptick. That seemed like that's one standalone thing. Again, I love transfer stations. I would hope to get the directive instead of find the money elsewhere, but I'm not sure quite where else. The thing which I'm seeking your input on is how do we sort of balance our immediate needs with also establishing long-term sustainability.
As far as the transfer station is concerned, what I'd like to to know is whatever revenue we're generating from the purchase of bags. I know that Randy had done some analysis in terms of tonnage
Mhm.
versus what you can put in a green and an orange bag versus what's being disposed of. And I know there was a fairly significant discrepancy. And it was hoped that the switch to bags, which would make it more obvious whether someone would be disposing of trash without a sticker, now that you can only see green and orange, would help the situation. I mean, we had the issue, and I don't know if that deficit includes the massive swap of stickers to bags, which doesn't include that. So now that we have switched, where does he see what people are buying in bags versus the tonnage that's being disposed of, and that discrepancy? I mean, I was at the transfer station the other day. There are people buying orange colored bags that are not town bags and throwing them out. I mean, we only have 2 guys up there, and they can't be everywhere, every place, all the time. But I distinctly saw orange bags that were town orange bags. And there are still a few stragglers that are doing the black and the white and the clear and all this other nonsense. But also, where would we need to be, because we have not raised the price of those bags with stickers for years and years. And I think we can certainly raise the price of those and still be competitive with some of the disposal companies that, they offer, I know, was it, one of them, I can't remember which one, has an option of, 4 kitchen bags or 7 kitchen bags a week, and you also pay for a cart for recycling. So I think we can significantly raise that. So where do we need to be to break even on certainly these things? And we also talked about potentially, if you want to use the transfer station, you got to buy a sticker, and the sticker costs you X dollars, and that's a fixed cost to maybe carry. So I'd like to know what we would need to do to make the thing whole before we just say, let's just shut it down.
Okay. Actually, I'm speaking with Irene Congdon at DEP this week to go through various metrics. One of them, though, is to have your fixed costs. We've all heard about China, and China refused to accept the recycling, and so it became far more costly. To cover those costs, you don't need to, you don't need to buy anything to recycle, but recycling is very, very far from free. Roll in all of your fixed, non-variable costs into a sticker for one. Likewise, it would let us know, because I can move back into how many households we have. The 2 private haulers that are licensed provide their own data in terms of their count of households, but I'm only kind of guessing the number of households that are served in Bolton, and I'm not sure if out of those households who are using the transfer station, what percentage of them are also receiving free bags? Because that could become a sad moment of diminishing returns if we're not picking up families who are younger. We're sort of in not a death spiral, but it's bad because we're subsidizing and making it free, but more people are aging into the free bags. I would look forward to working on that. It would cost more, though, and if the board is willing to be upfront and say, we're not willing to close the transfer station, we want to run it efficiently, even with the acknowledgement this will likely have an additional cost for residents. That's one good direction. For fiscal '26, though, I'm not sure, because that was my great too, I've been able to find some amount of money to offset that $1 million hole in our budget.
Yeah, I guess my thought on it is, as a municipality, we don't offer trash pickup. It's something that everybody has to pay as they go, whether it's private or whether you're using a transfer station. So I don't think there should ever be a deficit here. And if bags cost more money, they cost more money because that's an ascertainable expense. And, if people don't like how much trash stickers cost, they can go to, private pickup. But, I don't think that, the town coffers should be subsidizing transfer station. I just don't think
No.
that's the way it's supposed to work.
No.
So, I would not be opposed to raising the cost of bags immediately, or fairly immediately, so that we're not bleeding money here. I mean, what is it? It's
$1.25 for green and $2.50 for orange.
But I mean, our deficit here is it 150
It's bad.
that we're losing on the transfer station for 2024? And that's just money we shouldn't be losing.
No, I agree.
So, I mean, I think,
We should, at the very least, we should be raising the price of the bags.
I will move up my transfer station analysis and presentation then to the second select board meeting in December with some proposals on that.
I mean, it may not, close a $1 million gap, but I mean, even closing 75,000 is significant this year, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
With you on
Yeah.
that. For fiscal '26 then though, as I seek the board's input, because you're all much more familiar with what residents truly value. I value the rural beauty here, and I've spoken to a bunch of folks about what they like best about Bolton, but I'm looking for discrete things to reduce so that we can have a viable budget for fiscal '26. The ominous list of items on page 5 was my first pass at that. None of these are fun. All of them are cuts in services. But using the mindset of an operational override is something to be avoided at all costs. The only near-term option that I can think of is reductions of various categories of expense that are seemingly discrete or standalone,
I had questions about 4 and 5. Could you just explain what charging staff time plus benefits to revolving means?
Sure, for the departmental revolving funds that we've set up, we are already charging back some of the staff members' time. It is also permissible to charge all of the benefits or that same proportion back to the revolving fund.
So what's the downside to doing number 4?
It reduces that department's revolving fund, but I think one could have an accounting policy where, for any grants for which it's permissible and for any departmental revolving funds that are paying staff, we're also charging back all associated benefits or indirect costs.
Meaning, so it would just, so with respect to both 4 and 5, it just would mean that for like sort of substantive programmatic endeavors that might be covered or funded by the revolving fund or the grant amount, those would be reduced commensurately.
Correct. So, I know the 1.45% Medicare chargeback, it's not like, woo, but one should truly, charge it back. When, this grant is covering XYZ% of staff time, well, then it's covering XYZ% of the indirect for those staff.
Mhm.
That's an accounting policy. My back of the envelope estimate is that doing that would in fact free up like $34,000 within the raise and appropriate budget.
Right, okay. So it's-
Worth doing, so.
I mean, of all the things you listed here, it seems like the most innocuous.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah,
Mhm.
nothing is fun.
Um, So when I look at when I look at page 5, a few thoughts. One is that I do think it'll be really important, I mean, we should just keep revisiting this. It'll be really important to see how the budgets come in later this month, to see sort of what department heads have done, and sort of making decisions about what's a priority for them this year, because this is all a little bit in a vacuum, these
Right.
items.
Right.
And I also think that if I'm getting the math correctly, right? If we do this plus some transfer station, it could be max $500,000 worth of savings
Yes.
or reduction of
Reduction
expenses.
of expense.
Right,
Right.
so we're still 500K short,
True.
right? So more likely than not, still in a situation where we may be having to consider an operating override.
True. My presumption was likewise holding public safety harmless from any changes. So,
Um,
but yes.
I guess one thing I would ask of you both is, if we think that we're heading toward a situation where we would have to be potentially asking for an override, do you think we need to pair the ask with a list of recommended actions that will also reduce the cost this year as well? Like, do you think if we go for an override, it's gotta be an override plus some of these to be palatable?
I mean, I think we have to cut where we can, so that if we have to do an override, which I don't want to do at all, it would be a minimum, ask for the minimum override that we need to. I mean, I think we should be cutting where we can,
Hmm.
even though, it's pain all around, Marie, what is MAR on the library one?
Oh, it's this, let's say it's municipal, what does that acronym mean? Librarians talk about the MAR. It's from the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, where basically,
Oh,
in order
yeah.
to be a certified library, you have to maintain over your last 3 years, average at least a 2% increase or some percent increase. You can't, in the event of a budget deficit, close your library, or your library won't be accredited. And so this basically means we'd be reducing the library, just keeping it right at the level of being accredited.
To maintain certification.
Is that also including purchasing of materials?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, that's why we put actually many of the expenses, they're rolled into public buildings. We pulled out, electricity and a couple of these other things. Try to pull that out of the library.
So, I will just say that while I agree that we should cut where we can cut, one thing I just think we're gonna have to really think carefully about is some of the stuff here is, from the perspective of the town employees, setting aside the school, from the perspective of the town employees, some of this stuff is really significant.
It's awful.
And so I think it would be I'm just gonna be honest, I think it would be a really hard sell to be like, let's pair these awful cuts with a $500,000 override versus let's get an $800,000 override. I just think we should talk through that, because I don't know, like, people aren't gonna be happy with an override one way or the other. I don't know that they will be that much happier if we're pairing it with some really significant cuts to town programs, but I mean, this is sort of like a sensibility of the town question.
I think it's gonna come down to affordability of taxes. I mean, the average household's real estate taxes are going up $1,500 to $2,000 next year, right? And then we're gonna do an override on top of that. I mean, if we have to do an override on top of that, it's gotta be minimal. I mean, I just, people can't afford that. People cannot afford that.
Well, actually, we don't know how much it's gonna go. We think it's gonna go, but that's just the part, because they haven't really borrowed the next.
The next tranche would be likely in January, February.
Right.
It'd probably be for like $77 million. The increase at like 4.5% would be like 1.5 million for Bolton, so.
Well, assuming they can get 4.5. I mean, they based all their calculations on basically 4.25%. And I don't think the first lot that they borrowed was much higher than that. So, you know,
I mean,
you hope it's only 1,500. I mean, at 4.25%, it's basically $1,750 all in. But that's assuming 4.25%. I can't remember what it was for every 0.25%. It's some additional, some number of millions of dollars in interest more. Maybe at this point, it might be, we're discussing, you know, we need to possibly inflict a lot of pain here. And we've had to completely move our home because our cats, 3 new cats have taken over. And I was cleaning out stuff and I came across, well, one old and I found a more recent one, but it might be beneficial. I found a letter that our board, not this board, but our board, I've been on this board since George Washington crossed the Delaware, from 2015. And I think it might be apropos for our, yeah. This is from 2015, where our board, after the whatever fiscal year budget that was 2015, had a discussion and sent a letter to the district management as well as our school committee in terms of what transpired that year. And basically, this is 9 years ago, and basically expressing the unsustainability of the increases to the district budget vis-a-vis what the town can deal with. The second email, which is something I wrote on behalf of the board back in 2023, basically reiterated the same thing. So it's been a long time that we've been discussing the unsustainability, and you know, I think at this point we've hit a perfect storm.
These were the good old days when it was only 60% of the
Right.
town's budget,
Right.
not 66.
Right. So we've been talking about it and having this sort of the same theme for quite a number of years. And to that end, what I did was I took a look at, I think I shared this with you, Marie, a while ago. I took a look at, this is a snapshot of the district's budget last year, I'll just 1, 2, 3, from the last fiscal year in 2025. And I pulled this, that they didn't have at the time I looked, they didn't have a final budget, but this was something I pulled from their March 6th version, which is pretty much complete and not necessary to look at per the penny. But what I did was I pulled all of the non-teaching salaries. I didn't include teaching assistants, I didn't include the tutors, I didn't include custodial, I didn't include athletic salaries. So if you go through this multi-page spreadsheet, it basically, and this is straight from their spreadsheet, various categories of the non-teaching personnel that is involved in the district. And you can see the breakdown from each of the schools and guidance counselors in general, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing, it also includes and shows what the fringe is for that. And if you look at it, their salaries their total salaries, basically 43 million. And salaries and benefits accounts for about 77% of the total budget. But on the second to last page, if you look at the non-teaching employees, which are, everything that doesn't include teachers, teachers' assistants, custodials, athletics. If you add it all up and add the fringe in, we're looking at about a little more than $8 million worth of salary. And that equates to almost 12% of the total budget, and it equates to over 15% of just the salary line. And it seems to me that there's a lot of what I would call middle management here that we're paying for a management of a school district where essentially the teachers come to school, the kids come to school, the teachers teach the kids, and everybody goes home. And obviously there's more to that than meets the eye, but there seems to be a lot of non-teaching personnel. If you just look at, and the full-time equivalent numbers for clerical come from their spreadsheet. Just the clerical, there's 15.1 full-time equivalents. And then on the system-wide, there's another line item for administration and clerical support, which if I use the same number that I have on the second page for the cost for full-time equivalent, just salaries, there's another 11. So it's almost like 26 or 27 people in terms of clerical and administration, just in that little category. I would like to challenge the district to see where they can streamline some of their operation to help the three towns. There just seems to be a lot of stuff here. And I don't know of any business where the main function is to teach the kids. There's no research and development, they're not developing curriculum, they're not writing textbooks, they're not doing manufacturing, where there's this much, I'll use overhead, if you will, or middle management here.
Mm.
And can we possibly, look to see where they could streamline it a little bit? Because if they're gonna give us 500 grand, I mean, if you just reduce it by 10 or 15%, that's basically the three towns' assessment for this coming year.
Stan, I looked at the DZ website. I can't remember exactly what I drilled down to, but it gave me the number of people designated as administrators going back to, 5+ years.
Mm-hmm.
And the district's number of administrators has incrementally gone up. I think it started at something like 17 and is now something like 24 or 26, several of which were added in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So, I also question what benefit the district is getting from that and whether we're, whether there's something that's, I don't know, our test scores going up because we have more administrators. I mean, I'm not
Actually,
sure
no,
what the correlation is.
Yeah, they're actually not.
So, I also had noticed that trend in terms of just the number of administrative slots that were being reported.
Yeah, I have it here, but we won't go into it. I'll send it to you, Maureen. You can send it out. But basically looks at both U.S. News and World Report and also the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in terms of their ratings of all of the schools in Massachusetts. And you can see, I was able to grab from 2013 through 2024, and I just did a simple comparison between Florence Sawyer and the high school and our next door neighbor, in Harvard, and you can see that, but I'll send that to, then that might be something interesting that we might want to chat with our school committee reps.
I think you and I looked at the same
Yeah,
information.
but I'll send that out. But I think there's a lot of money here, and there's a lot of personnel, and there's a lot of categories, and I'm not sure what all these people are doing and why we need, 15 or 20 clerical positions in a school where, you should be having district-wide contracts, and, stuff is not necessarily changing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I'd like to see if there's some, so none of this is touching the kids, this is not touching the teachers, this is not touching any of this stuff, but there's a lot of, we're spending a lot of money on stuff.
In your conversations with the other two town administrators, do you have any sense of the FY26 fiscal outlook for Stowe and Lancaster?
In my conversation with Lancaster, they're feeling pretty confident and not concerned based on having recently passed a $1.2 million operating override. So those monies are dedicated for the current year, but then for fiscal 26, those monies are available for any purpose.
Yeah.
Stowe is not quite as confident, but they're still way under budget.
No, an override is forever, so Lancaster gets an extra $1.2 million forever.
Yeah.
Right, the last, the sort of snapshot page in this packet was, I was just sort of looking, because Bolton had gone through a period in the early 1990s through 1995. It was like a world of overrides, like notable world of overrides, which then kind of stabilized up until 2005. I've done a little bit of poking. These are only reflective of operating override votes that succeeded likewise. There's a whole win-lose column.
Yeah.
And this is exclusively for operating overrides, either municipal or municipal and school.
Well, I do know over the past 20 years, I mean, we've been scrubbing that budget, and you've been part of that process for at least 10 of those 20-plus years, so.
Sorry, Marie, are there a bunch of years cut off at the
Yeah,
bottom?
because there was no data. Yeah, so
Oh, there's no data, or it was,
there was like, so it looks sort of like this, so it jumps from like 2007, 2008, 2009. No one had anything going on until 2024.
oh, okay, so no town did anything between
Yeah.
2009 and,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah. What's it all mean? Yeah, so it's like.
It means we haven't done an override since the year I moved to Bolton.
Yep, that's right, we haven't. We have not. We have not.
I have not had a successful, I was only again filtering
Yeah.
overrides that passed that were operating on
I know we're gonna have to go into executive session at some point, but, we have a meeting on Thursday with two of our school committee reps that are coming. And I know like it's coming on the heels of this meeting, and I guess what I'm hoping for that is that you can kind of take the lead on presenting just the facts, right? The facts of where we are. But I think the message, or I guess what I want to test out with you both, is that the message to them is the town is already starting to look at, with sort of like a, is this mission critical, and if not, can we consider cutting it in order to deal with our fiscal situation? And we would ask the school committee basically be doing the same thing with their budget, and maybe point out some of the stuff around clerical and admin. The only thing that I do want to just note is that, like, while I appreciate that this is an effort to kind of not touch academic stuff and the kids. There may be things in there that we just aren't aware of that are related to the kids, so I think we wanna like go into it with an open mind to understand what some of these salaries are for, but the numbers are pretty stark, like, and the increases that you see in the administration are.
I mean, there are, I mean,
Yeah.
there are counselors, there are extracurricular advisors, there are deans. There's lots of stuff that potentially touch the kids at some point. But I just wanted to show everything. you
Yeah.
know.
And I think we also had the issue, and I don't know if it was I don't think it's an issue on the town side, but I think things were added during COVID when there was free money floating around, right? Coming in from the government, so, you know, expenses creeped up when it seemed like there was more sources of funds, and now those expenses are permanent.
Right.
And we don't have the COVID money, you know, the ARPA money and, you know, the extra funding from the federal government for the schools, that's not coming in anymore, but we increased our staff. So we're paying for it.
And still paying for it.
I can't remember what the windfall was with free cash. Why we got so much certified last year. I don't remember what, there were a few things that were unexpected. But normally, we don't get a lot of, our free cash typically is not that high. It used to be much higher, and we've been deliberately doing it down. One thing I'd like to bring up is, one thing that I have argued for quite some time, is I believe that when we go through and we finish whatever we do with the budget and whatever the free cash number is, and we've attempted to keep it at like $350K, that we come up with a policy that says, okay, for next year, when we're done with free cash, we do everything on our power that free cash number needs to be whatever % larger than it was when we finished the year before. Because in my opinion, we should be building our free cash reserves for just what is happening now. There were some on the board that advocated that we don't need any free cash and we shouldn't be relying on it. And unfortunately, we relied at $900,000 last year to balance the budget. We had to do that. But I think we should consciously be making sure that every year we are increasing. I know they say 3 to 5% or whatever, but
3 to 5%.
we should be, and we're at the very low end of that anyway. But I think we should have a policy, and at some point, maybe if we want to have a further discussion at a future meeting and maybe take a vote, then we should set some policy that says, if it's, X dollars when we're done with the budget this year, it's X dollars plus whatever it is, at a minimum, the following year. So that we have some cash, because obviously we can't take from stabilization, because we kind of knew all this was coming. So, we can't raise stabilization. So I think we should be looking at that. I mean, Stowe's done a good job, or a different, I won't say better job, but a different job of having more money in the bank to deal with this kind of stuff than Bethel has.
But I think if you look at the budget, the operating budget for '24, right, and the Department of Revenue says your free cash should be 3 to 5%. They're looking at what you generate. If we started off with $350 in the bank, our free cash is close to like 1.9%. I mean, our budgets are running very lean, yeah, scarily.
Do either of you happen to know if advisories plan to stick to like roughly the same calendar that they typically use for?
The calendar is posted right now on the advisory page. There's a link at the lower left that leads to the updated calendar. It's very similar to what they've done in the past.
Okay.
Meeting in person tomorrow night here at 6:30.
I know. Okay, thanks.
Did you have a specific question?
Well, I'm just like, I don't think we wanna be winding this stuff up at the last minute, which is sometimes what happens. Like, if it looks like we're gonna be in a position of potentially asking for an override, I feel like we should know that as soon as possible, so I don't know if there's any way that they can like expedite it. But I can reach out to Bob maybe.
Yeah, if you want to, do you want me to distribute a letter from the board to the advisory?
I don't know, what do you guys think?
Well, I think if, we hopefully should, well, it would be nice to know as soon as possible if we're gonna need some type of override and what that potential number is, and, you know, whether it's X or Y, depending upon what we think we need to cut, or whether we wanna have a larger override to save some of the other stuff. I guess also, in concert with that, depending on what levers we pull, how does that look in terms of impacting our credit rating? Like, you know, not funding OPEB, or, you know, if we take free cash to zero, which I'll never agree to that. But where will we squeeze the balloon that it pops out with affecting our credit rating? Because I think that's an important factor as well.
Yeah, I suppose maybe one question is, how quickly do you think Nanachko will have like the pro forma budget built with everybody's budgets that get submitted on December 9th?
Likely by the end of that week. I mean, she's got this down to a system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe we can consider we have a meeting on what, like the 18th or something like
The
that?
19th.
19th. We could consider then whether we want to send advisory some sort of letter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, obviously I'm going tomorrow night, because I think this presentation from the advisory chair just lead them to the question of, well, each option that you're showing me has a shortfall. What are you thinking? What is your direction?
Brian, I'm just looking at the advisory calendar now and remembering that a lot of the advisory calendar is limited by the school's calendar. Like, so right now, the Minuteman and Neshoba are on the advisory calendar for March 4th, because that's the date that the school gave us that is reasonable for them to have their numbers to us. And without that huge piece of the puzzle, I don't know how much faster the advisory committee can work to have a full picture. So that's the last day. The March 4th, they have the Board of Assessors and the two schools. Prior to that, February 11th is like the last batch of town departments.
Okay,
the
that's pretty
assessors.
early.
Yeah, so I can take the assessors and ask them to go a little bit earlier, and that would get everybody in by early February, other than the schools.
That seems reasonable.
Well, your comment about the schools are driving some of this, I mean, I had made a suggestion some meetings ago that maybe we need to tell and vote the district what our number needs to be. That we can't live with anything beyond this number. And maybe we can get another town to go along. You said Lancaster seems to be.
Lancaster seems to be fine, but.
Well, that's interesting to me, but, you know, Stowe may have a appetite to want to potentially participate in that.
I think the other thing that I've seen, like looking at Lancaster's override last year, it was not a municipal override, it was municipal and school. Because, schools are very popular. They get votes. With the realization, though, that should it fail, we're still obligated to fund the school. So all of the scary cuts on page 5 would happen,
Mhm.
you know?
Oh, you can always vote the budget down.
We just need to know. Yeah.
So I think we could consider sending something like that in January,
Mm.
because by then we'll have seen, and it'll also be before, usually they have their budget workshop in mid to late January.
No, their budget workshop is their workshop
First pass.
is the first passes in January. That's when the district just basically tells them.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, that, like, I think if we send them our thing before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I know it's a
any
grim
other
topic.
questions for now?
It's a grim topic. I think what I've heard back is obviously focus on maximizing the efficiency, the operational efficiency of the transfer station. And folks really want to see the first pass roll-up budget as of, for your December 19 all-in meeting.
With my birthday cake.
Is your birthday the 19th?
It is.
Okay, I gotta
It's a
remember.
big one this year, so I expect a good cake.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
You're really writing it in your book.
I fellow Sagittarius, eh? Well, you're like a cusp baby. Are we allowed to, oh, it's 8:13, we're almost like exactly on time to go into executive session.
Well, you just timed that perfectly, Chairman. My God, the master of the schedule.
Okay. So, I would entertain a motion to enter executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for purpose 3, to conduct strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation with Teamsters Union Local Number 170, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the town.
So moved?
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call. Kate?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes.